6 and Sundays at 6:30 p.m.
Welcome to the broadcast tonight. A look at President Obama through the eyes of Richard Wolfe, who covered him during the campaign and has written a new book called Renegade.
Everyone says, you know, he's very cool under fire, and does he have any emotion at all? Well, I saw him when he was grumpy and frustrated, and he could get annoyed with me with questions. He wants, I think, to be pushed, but doesn't always enjoy it. And I thought my job was to probe and analyze.
We continue with Guillermo del Toro. The Mexican filmmaker has co-written his first novel about vampires. It is called The Stream.
Monsters are incredibly beautiful, fragile creatures because they need imagination to be sustained. What horrifies me is reality. The banality of this existence we are starting to live, which is like a tabloid existence, a reality show existence. You know, I like monsters because they are absolute representations of something.
Wolfe and del Toro, next. Funding for Charlie Rose has been provided by the following.
Each day, 1 billion people won't find safe drinking water. Around the world, we're helping communities to access clean water, working to improve lives through conservation and education, one drop at a time.
Additional funding for Charlie Rose was also provided by these funders.
And by Bloomberg, a provider of multimedia news and information services worldwide. From our studios in New York City, this is Charlie Rose.
Richard Wolfe is here. He covered the 2008 presidential race while he was a correspondent for Newsweek magazine. He tells the story of Barack Obama's rise and campaign in his new book, Renegade, The Making of a President. I am pleased to have Richard Wolfe on this broadcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Charlie.
And welcome back.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. Renegade happens to be the president's name given by the Secret Service.
Yes, and they say that there's no correlation at all between character and the code names, but I kind of think there is.
What was Cheney was Angler, was it?
Angler.
And Bush was?
Variously, I think at one point he was Tumbleweed. But, you know, the interesting thing here is, for me, it was a starting point for the conversation. It's not a perfect characterization. It's a code name, after all. Right. But for a guy who breaks the rules, who doesn't wait his turn, but is also a very disciplined, sometimes even hesitant and doubtful rule breaker, that was the construct for me.
21 months, how many interviews?
I counted it more than a dozen. Often, you know, we had the formal sit-down interviews with the voice recorders and the handlers, but some of the best stuff was this sort of rolling conversation we had, the encounter in the hotel lobby or after a game of basketball or, you know, along the way.
You played with him?
Several times.
All right.
No, don't be surprised, because I'm small and from England, but hey.
There's some very good small basketball players.
I'm not sure I'm one of them.
There is also this, though, he suggested the idea.
He did.
To you.
He did. And I told him it was a stupid idea.
Did you really?
I really did. You know,
Teddy White had written a great chronicle of the 1960 campaign, Kennedy
He
Nixon.
did. And that's what he had in mind. And I said to him, I thought I loved the Teddy White books too, but I thought the genre was kind of exhausted. People just weren't publishing or reading that kind of thing anymore. They like the partisan stuff about why Republicans are evil and Democrats were stupid.
And also newspapers. I mean, Teddy White did that over a period of time in which nobody else did it. Today, everybody is doing that with the nature of the coverage.
Right, and that was my concern as well. And he looked very crestfallen. I'm sure he recovered fine, but I went back and reconsidered and thought, well, maybe we can revive this and reinvent it. So Teddy White was an inspiration, but not an aspiration. I mean, there were elements of it that I thought were still fresh, especially the opening on Election Day. The idea that the last 24, 36 hours is something very special. But a lot of the stuff in between that felt new, I think, in 1960, the statistical stuff, it just doesn't hold up today.
Talking to strategists and that whole thing.
Yeah.
So what was the nature of the relationship Obviously, it's reporter candidate.
Yes, it is.
But was it more? I mean, did you ever have conflict? Did you have...
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the funny things about watching him now. Everyone says, you know, he's very cool under fire, and does he have any emotion at all? Well, I saw him when he was grumpy and frustrated, and he could get annoyed with me with questions. He wants, I think, to be pushed. But doesn't always enjoy it. And I thought my job was to probe and analyze. Look, this was my third presidential campaign, and I thought, for any of us who covered the 2000 campaign, where there seemed to be no real substance, and you had a very charismatic, charming candidate, I thought we all had an obligation to push these people. Did they know something more than the talking points? Could they adapt over the course of 21 months, a long time? Could they adapt to real life, current affairs, especially in foreign policy, which is one of my first loves? So I was pushing him on, and I think he responded to that. In fact, I think that may have been why we connected.
He liked the challenge of having to define himself.
I think the processy stories, the who's up, who's down, the poll numbers, were actually easy for him. He thought that was sort of taking
tactical
politics.
Analysis.
Yeah, it was trivial.
All right, so here's what's interesting to me is of his own self-awareness and how he described himself, which part of that didn't ring true for you? Where is he trying to promote an image which may not be at the heart of who he is?
That's a great question. I remember one conversation we had early in the primary phase where he told me, you know, I could walk away from all of this. And I just said, oh, what do you mean you could walk away from all of this? And he said, well, you know, I could go back and, you know, be with my family. I said, what, teach law and just hang out with your kids? He said, yeah, I could do that. I'm not sure she could, meaning Hillary Clinton. Right. And I just said, I don't believe it. I just don't believe it.
I don't either.
So his self-image was that it was fine. But he went on to say...
His self-image was he didn't need it.
He didn't need it, which is a presidential construct. Oh, the people want me to do this. But he said, now they've annoyed me. Now I really want to win. And there's this conflict here between a guy who is incredibly competitive. Really, he has to win. He's driven to win. But is comfortable enough with himself, or at least he thinks he is, that he doesn't need to strive. There's an effort at being effortless. There's a story...
No, that's well said.
A story in the book where he has to memorize this big speech in Iowa, the J.J. Dinner speech, which is the launch pad for many candidates. He has to memorize it. Now, as you can tell from the use of the teleprompter today, he doesn't really memorize anything. And he doesn't tell his staff anything. They don't know if he's prepping. He goes back to his hotel room every night, turns on the TV really loud. The staff thinks this is kind of strange. And he rehearses on his own, out of sight.
Reading out loud.
Just committing it to memory. And so when they go to the first run-through and all his aides are nervous, has he got it? Has he done any work on it? They don't know. He aces it. That is the sort of the effort behind
I think that is a
performer.
When I read that in your book, I said this is a defining sort of example of what he appears to me to be like.
Right.
You know, someone who's ambitious. Ambition's a good thing. Someone who set a goal. It's a good thing.
Right.
He went to Chicago to become a community organizer because he wanted to find a route to public office, I believe.
A couple of things. I think first of all, he wanted to add some roots to his life.
Right.
Because he had this rootless existence, and his family was incredibly dysfunctional. Not just an absent father, but an absent mother too. So Chicago was a place he could find some roots in, and he found among them Jeremiah Wright. Community organizing was a way to connect with the dreams he had, literally the dreams to be part of the civil rights movement, which he was obviously too young for. He came too late for that. And so, and the third piece of it was discipline. I repeatedly put in the book about Malcolm X being a model for him. And Malcolm X wasn't a community organizer, but one thing he loved about Malcolm X as a reader and as, I believe, as a writer was what he calls the repeated acts of self-creation of Malcolm X. And this idea that he is a self-made man, that he could will himself into being by this disciplined approach to organizing himself, organizing a community, I I think was key. He is his project. I mean, some of his critics say it's narcissistic, but he is a self-made person, and by any objective analysis, having the childhood he had, he really ought to be a mess. There should not be any trace of discipline. That comes from him, and it's a constant effort, I believe.
Looking at the Jeremiah Wright thing, what was intriguing to me, too, the insight you had, that he visited Jeremiah Wright before he went to make his speech at the National Press Club. No one knew about that.
Nobody knew. There was a lot of secrecy.
Did anyone ask the question of the candidate during that time, have you seen Jeremiah Wright?
Yes. In fact, I think I did.
And the answer was?
He dodged it.
How does he dodge it in front of you?
We haven't connected at this point, or...
so the follow-up is, have you tried?
Yeah, and next question.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you couldn't ask the follow-up and the follow-up and the follow-up, but you had all this access.
Oh, yeah, no, that was something, the secret meeting was something I discovered later. This was incredibly sensitive at the time. They really thought that Jeremiah Wright could bring down the entire campaign. The 2-year effort could be brought down, not so much by the first round of it, but by the comeback tour. They saw their numbers collapsing, so everything about it was radioactive.
Here's what else interests me about the Jeremiah Wright, and I know this because of your book. The idea that he had an early premonition that there may be some trouble with the sermons that Jeremiah Wright, and so he ordered the staff to go over them.
And they never did the work.
Unfortunately, it never happened.
They never did the work.
That suggests he knew the inflammatory nature of the speeches and had in fact heard them. And therefore any other...
Yeah, well, his friends suspected there was something in there, and clearly this is a speaker who, Jeremiah Wright, who was seeking to provoke. And one of his friends explained, if Reverend Wright could be outrageous and make the world seem outrageous, then maybe your problems weren't so great. It was a way of putting the world back into focus. But they knew that there were danger points in there. And I actually think the dirty secret of it is that he wasn't in church very often. And this was kind of embarrassing.
And so he may have ordered this up. Yeah, exactly.
This is embarrassing.
He didn't want people to know he didn't go to church.
He had written a chapter in The Audacity of Hope talking about how political office holders should pay attention to communities of faith. There's a whole chapter on faith in there.
So what does this suggest to you, Richard?
That there is, along with this sense of authenticity, a degree of showmanship and even artifice to...
Artifice?
Yes. I think there's a theatrical performance that this president and then candidate knew that he could perform. For a start, I think he's actually a loner. I actually think for all of his comfort on stage, he is most comfortable on his own. So he knows he's performing, and he's good at it. But that doesn't mean to say that the public persona is the real thing. He is...
and how isn't the public persona the real thing?
Because he likes to be on his own, because I don't think, actually...
Yeah, but when he walks out to make a speech, it's almost like he's above the scene. He's looking of the moment and above the moment.
Right, but the clever thing is that as a community organizer, he understood the power of saying, of breaking down the barrier, of saying that my story is like your story, and your story is like the person standing next to you or the person down the street. And weaving together people's stories is a technique that nobody could see, but it had a political impact. It's not just a narrative. He does it in his books. He calls them sacred stories. He goes around Chicago collecting these stories for his community. That's how you build the community. That's how you build the organization. But it is a technique.
Bill Clinton said at this table once when I asked him about his intelligence, he said, I have a certain intelligence that works and served me well in politics. I know how to connect the dots. And it seems to me what he did was he made his narrative America's narrative, and America's narrative his narrative.
That's
and
right.
all of a sudden he had a story for America.
With him as the storyteller, the power of being the narrator of the story is very important. Not just telling his story, but telling America's story. You know, as a community organizer, you have to not just collect these stories, but create a narrative. At that period, he was writing journals which became Dreams from My Father. And this takes me back to Malcolm X, by the way, because Malcolm X's classic book, the autobiography, quote unquote, was as told to Alex Haley. Alex Haley developed this, the sort of semi-fictionalized weaving together of truth and idealism, let's put it as. And I think he did that very powerfully, politically and, by the way, in terms of book writing.
Churchill said, "History will be kind to me because I'll write that history."
Yes, and Churchill came out pretty well from it, from the history he wrote.
You build on Dreams of My Father in terms of how that whole, how he defined it,
right?
And you believe, what is at the essence of that?
Dreams from My Father is a bit of a distorted view because it's someone who wasn't there, and in many ways the journey of discovery is really what that book is about. And the journey involves, look, his mother wanted him to see himself as a citizen of the world. In fact, I quote him saying that his mother thought at times she was, quote unquote, not white. His discovery of himself is really him telling the story of the journey, and it's the process of piecing these things together that really makes him who he is. That's not always satisfying, because in the end he doesn't connect with his father. He doesn't really connect with his mother either. But he had that choice. He was a middle-class kid, not a working-class kid, middle class, like Michelle Obama's family. One-bedroom bungalow in the south side of Chicago. That's where her mother was living until she moved into the White House. Right. So really an extraordinary journey, but he had the opportunity to be, as he put it, a citizen of the world, and turned his back on it. He had the opportunity to not really be rooted in religion. His mother wasn't. She had this very sort of, frankly, hippie view of spiritual commonality. She was an anthropologist. Now, he can be an anthropologist. He can step outside his own society, his own culture, even outside his own world. But he wanted to find his roots, and he found them both as a community organizer, but also in his marriage to Michelle Obama.
He found that experience of...
He wanted a family where the father was home every night for dinner, a nuclear family in a big American city, an African-American identity. He chose that.
He said early on from your book that he, after the campaign, but before the election, he had begun to focus on Hillary Clinton as his Secretary of State.
Yeah.
Because she had certain qualities, discipline, intellect, toughness.
That's right.
Suggesting those are the qualities he admires.
Absolutely. And this is at a time when the wounds are still so raw. I mean, his friends, his aides, and even he really feels passionate about the kinds of exchanges they had, the blows she landed on him. It was very, very painful. You don't have to go back that far to see what they were saying about each other.
What was it that they said that made him feel wounded?
That he wasn't ready to be commander-in-chief,
yeah, but
he was just like Jesse Jackson after he won in South Carolina. South Carolina was a big deal for them. The constant sort of
winning
belittling...
of it, or the Clinton's reaction,
the belittling.
The former president's.
Yeah. The belittling of him, the idea that he was a rookie, that he was naive and inexperienced and not up to it, not worthy of the contest. I think that was intensely annoying and more insulting.
What is it that he believes? What is his ideology? Is it only practicality?
Well, I think he has elevated pragmatic politics to a different level. And if you listen to the 2004 convention speech, his breakthrough moment, this is a slippery political character in the sense that if you're going to unite red America and blue America, you're a compromise candidate. The line of that compromise is not easy to predict, and it was difficult for his campaign to understand where the line was. He likes to think of himself as an innovative policy thinker. But the idea that so long after the heat of the Cold War and the battles, the ideological battles of the Reagan era, the idea that you're going to have a clean ideological description of this guy is, I think, actually kind of naive.
Okay, but you think it's being shaped now, for example,
yes,
by the decisions he has to make. He'll have to come hard against what does he believe in,
yeah,
and whether he is making decisions.
Well, he wants to be the Reagan of the left. He wants to be a transformative figure to shift the balance of American debate to the left. There is no question about it.
How do you know that?
Because of the way he talked about Reagan, because of the way he expressed it to me.
How did he talk about Reagan?
He thought Reagan, while he opposed just about every single one of his policies, remember, as a community organizer, he was dealing at the sort of the rough end of, on the streets of especially the economic policies. He admired his ability to be a great president, the moment of the time, the coming together of the time and the man, and the lasting impact he had in shifting the debate to one side. Now, he comes at it from a completely different angle, of course. His instincts on, when he talks about healthcare, we're in the middle of the healthcare debate, he says quite openly, if you could do it all over again, if you could start from scratch, he'd want a single-payer system. Now, that's about as close to a definition of progressive or liberal as you could get. But being pragmatic, he says,
we're not going
to do that. So he's intensely pragmatic about it. Now, look at how closely he defends the public option. That's going to be a defining moment for him. Whether it ends up as a full-blown system,
because it is the one item that the right is jumping
cannot
on.
Stand.
And
Cannot stand.
And we use that to try to define him as a president.
Yeah.
Aha, this is who we told you he was.
But he has a social project in mind. He wants to establish this and leave that as his legacy. I have no doubt about that.
Well, say that in different words.
That he wants to say, he wants to, for start, be transformative, change the entire framework of healthcare delivery in this country. But beyond that, to reshape the playing field so that competition moves differently because of government action. That government, in conservative terms, is the solution and not the problem here. That it can deliver healthcare better with lower administrative costs. That's a distinctly liberal view of what government can do and how it should affect every part of society, the private sector, delivery of healthcare. I mean, that's an ambitious liberal project.
There are two events that are interesting to me in this man as well. One is the defeat in the race for Congress. Mm-hmm. What did that do to him?
Well, apart from hating losing, it's still searing for him. And he gets very defensive about it. He says, I didn't do so badly. I only lost by 19 points. Well, no, he did really badly.
19 points?
He says, I didn't poll before I made my decision. That was my mistake. Well, it was a bit more than that. This is a sort of unchecked self-confidence. And normally his discipline is very good at checking that cockiness, frankly, that can be there. Now, you need to be confident as a leader. You do. Otherwise, you wouldn't run for president. You wouldn't try and lead the free world. But he thought that he saw weakness in Bobby Rush in Chicago, where there was none. He underestimated the power of ethnic politics. One of his mentors told me, thank goodness he was bad at ethnic politics, because if he'd been good at it, he wouldn't be running for president and obviously now be president. But there was an idea that personal charm, times were right for him to just go do this. And so when he came back to his friends afterwards, after really getting beaten very badly, and said he was going to run for Senate, they all laughed at him. And in fact, Tom Daschle, obviously, leading figure in the Democratic Party, when he saw him, he thought, I can see your talent, but losing a race for the House is not the best platform for running for Senate. That was 2004, and he ended up obviously being one of the few bright spots for Democrats in 2004.
Well, that's the second point. In 2004, he got to deliver the convention speech at the Democratic National Convention. That ignited a national attention for him.
It did.
How did that happen? And how much of it was his understanding that if I can get this shot with my rhetorical skills, it'll put me into another zone?
Well, state senator from Illinois doesn't get to really have the platform. This is a combination of events. Someone who has a unifying, positive message, which was very important for that convention, that Kerry and Bob Shrum wanted at that time. David Axelrod's connections with all of these people, his political advisor, his consigliere, just having the access, and him as the most visible symbol of diversity. I mean, I don't think there was any question that the diversity helped him.
So who made the decision?
Well, John Kerry and Bob Shrum.
So Shrum actually said, okay.
This is the guy.
And recommended him, and Kerry said yes.
Right. And they had campaigned together. Kerry had been impressed at some education event, I think it was, in Chicago. So there was something there. But this isn't, I don't think he sang that much at the event that they thought, oh, he's the keynote speaker.
What don't you know about him that you want to know?
There's quite a lot. I think he's a hidden character. I think it's intentionally hidden. Right now, I think the key question is how the presidency changes someone, because it does change you. I mean, I saw it. I interviewed him in the Oval Office, and the impatience, the moodiness came a little quicker. There was a presidential speed to the impatience. I think it's difficult to change yourself into something different, but maybe some of the characteristics are reinforced inside the White House because people are there to reinforce what you want, to predict what you want. So,
not only that, you look at the world differently because you see the problems that you have to make hard decisions. You can't just talk about them, you have to do them.
And we're seeing that on a whole range of national security things, Guantanamo Bay. The rhetoric comes a lot easier. He actually finds it, I think, relatively simple to jettison some of his promises because of that pragmatism.
And because he can.
Because he can, and because he's competitive. He wants to win.
For the country, for himself, for everybody.
All of it.
I didn't mention this, and there are lots of other little things that have gotten attention here. One is that after the failed congressional race, there was some tension in the marriage, and they overcame that, and some other things. True. Renegade, The Making of a President by Richard Wolfe, based on exclusive interviews with Barack Obama. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.
Pleasure. Back in a moment. Stay with us. Guillermo del Toro is here. His films combine science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Over the years, his work has attracted a devoted cult following. He is known for his rich imagination and his passion for detail. In 2006, he earned widespread praise for Pan's Labyrinth. The film was an international success and won 3 Academy Awards. Here is a look at some of his work.
Mira qué curioso. ¿Qué te parece que sea? ¿Un juguete?
Santi, habla conmigo. No quiero que nadie se muera. Muchas veces morí. Santi, por favor.
You and I, we have the same enemy. We want the same thing.
Hey! I'm on your side.
Sure.
Here I come.
Del Toro has co-written his first novel. It is called The Strain. It is about one of his favorite topics, vampires. I am pleased to have him back at this table. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here.
I mean, I watched you watch this little composite we put together, montage.
Yes.
And you're like a kid.
It's like a family album.
At your life. Yeah, it's like a family album.
Yeah, it is. Because, you know, creating monsters, I think I'm fertile only with monsters.
You create them left and right.
I am the Richard Attenborough of monsters. I love studying them, creating them, knowing how they work.
Now, what about vampires? What is it about vampires?
When I was very young, a very young kid, I was already a collector of books by age 4 or 5. I started collecting little paperbacks, and one of them, at around age 7, I came upon a book that was a treatise about vampire fact. In other words, it collected European lore about vampirism.
Right.
You know, little details like a Polish vampire actually doesn't have fangs; it has a stinger that comes out of the tongue.
Yeah.
Or the fact that you can a vampire always returns to the family first and vampirizes the family before it goes out into the world. And those things you can see in Kronos or Blade. And I started keeping. I have the diaries, my diaries with my drawings, and I started accumulating vampire lore. Some of it made it to Kronos, some of it made it to Blade, but a lot of it didn't find a way to find its way to movies. And one good day, I had the idea for the strain.
And so what did you do?
Well, I started by thinking, well, what would happen with a pandemic?
Yeah.
A pandemic that actually ended up being an invasion by a vampire virus, you know, an alien entity. The idea to formulate that vampirism is actually like a thinking cancer. That it's a cancer that develops an alternate system of organs.
Yeah.
They takes over a human body and functions, kicks in, and your engine changes. You belong to a hive mentality. You become essentially a drone, an insect. You know, and all these things started to get together, and I thought, what would happen to the CDC on that pandemic? How would bureaucracy deal with that? And how
You mean the Center of Disease Control?
Yes. Because they would be dealing with it, and little by little, unfortunately, the world caught with us. But in all those years, it was still a fantasy.
Now, this had something to do also, as a kid, you had these huge, scary dreams.
Yes. I had the lucid dreaming, which meant you wake up in the bed that you are actually sleeping in, and you think you are in the room, and that is real, and you see things. You know, and I used to see monsters as a kid.
Now, did that make its way into the strain?
Yes, actually, there is one chapter that I wrote. It was originally a little story I wrote at age 14. And it's a chapter of a kid sitting by a windowsill, looking out into the street. And it's completely autobiographical. I mean, I never saw a vampire, but it's me sitting at my grandmother's second floor window, looking at the street at night. I'm waiting to see somebody walk by at 2, 3 a.m. and thinking, what if that person turns and looks at me?
Yeah.
I mean, and that horror, that's in there. I mean, and many other things that are autobiographical are in there.
So what's inside of your head?
There are a lot of monsters, and a lot of the idea that monsters are incredibly beautiful, fragile creatures because they need imagination to be sustained. What horrifies me is reality. The banality of this existence we are starting to live, which is like a tabloid existence, a reality show existence. You know, I like monsters because they are absolute representations of something.
When you look at monsters and contrast that with science fiction,
yes,
what's more compelling for you?
I am not a hardware guy. I really like monsters. I'm a biological perverse, anatomically perverse guy, and I'm into squishy things. And the fantasy that appeals to me, or the science fiction that appeals to me, has a humanistic strike, or an idea, a philosophical strike, like Philip K. Dick, Theodore Sturgeon. I'm not into phasers, lasers, or barbarians, sweaty barbarians killing, rescuing big bosom princesses. You know, I love stuff that has a little more meat to the bone, so to speak.
Do they now just give you complete artistic control?
No, I tried to get it, and each situation has gotten increasingly better. I feel very lucky now with Peter and in the past with Pedro Almodovar to have been produced by two filmmakers I admire, and to have produced, as a producer, have produced filmmakers I admire, like Juan Antonio Bayona, for example.
When you were here before, we did this wonderful conversation.
Yes, I was thinner then.
And you brought along a couple of your pals from Mexico who are also giants in the film business. There has been this evolution for you, though. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, you always were yes?
Yes.
Then you started out doing stage things?
Yeah, I did.
Building stages? Or?
Well, what I did, which is curious, I used to be doing short films that were very odd and required sets and creatures. And I taught myself to draw, to paint, to sculpt, to build these things for my short films. And then people started calling me to do it on their films.
Right.
And I did it for a while until I got Kronos made. And my company did all the effects in Kronos, and then I closed my company.
I'm a filmmaker now.
Because I could afford somebody else to do it. But I still dwell on it. Like, you know, some sculptors hate me because I will come in with the calipers, and I would measure each dimension on the sculpture and tell them, this is wrong, this is wrong. Not that I can do it better, but I know enough that I know they can do it better.
So what's the quality that does it? A sense of proportionality?
In a way, I mean, to have a really good sense of balance, the first thing on any monster design, the first thing visually is the silhouette. If we were to go by details, I would say you figure out the silhouette first. That is easy or hard to read, but in an elegant way. That if you want it to keep changing, like the monster is never clear, you want it to be a silhouette that, depending on the pose or the action, shifts. Or something really beautiful and elegant that can be read really quick. Second comes the details. And people normally sculpt the details first, and I say, no. Don't texture anything until we get the silhouette. Then textures, and finally color. And that's the way you progress through that.
If I went back to your childhood in Mexico.
Yes. What a horror.
Well, is it a horror?
It was spiritually, because I grew, you know, the Catholic deal I got as a kid was really puzzling. You know, you are 4, 5 years old, 6 years old, and somebody tells you, look, there's something we need to talk to you about, which is called original sin. And we wanted you to know that you're going to pay for it and atone for it the rest of your life. And I go, oh, really? And then they tell you, and then you're going to die, and no matter what you do, you're going to go to purgatory.
What's in it for me?
Yes, exactly. And you know, so the childhood was full of this sinister, Mexican Catholicism is, for some strange reason, really torturous and really gory. The iconography is really brutal and gory and extreme. You know, you have these statues of Jesus laid out in a box of glass, and he's purple with exposed bone and bruises and bleeding and all these things, and it's really affecting. It's really quite a graphic.
And how did it affect your spirituality or your religiosity?
Well, it does, because at the same time you get a sense, an immediate impact that is morbid. You know, and then they tell you you're gonna eat the flesh and drink the blood of that gentleman there, and the presentation is not exactly appealing. It's not like a buffet. And it's laid out in an incredibly shocking way, and you're 7, 8 years old, and then they say, well, now you come and eat the flesh of the Lord.
So you think religion should be marketed better?
I don't know at this stage. You know, I mercifully lapsed as a Catholic, I say, but as Buñuel used to say, I'm an atheist, thank God. You know, there is always, once a Catholic, always a Catholic in a way.
So you're not with him, or you're with him?
No, I think I'm lapsed enough.
Vanel, yes.
Yeah, I'm lapsed enough. I believe in man. I believe in mankind as the worst and the best that has happened to this world.
Your father was kidnapped for like 72 hours.
Yeah, no, 72 days.
72 days?
Yes, 2 days. And it was quite harrowing, but it was... I really believe, I have this strange theory that must be very Catholic, that actually pain shows you what you need. You know, I believe life gives you what you need, not what you want. We discussed this somewhere in the past. Right. And people think that getting what you want is great. And I don't think so. Getting what you need. So I always see what's coming, and whatever happens, I go, what can I learn from this? And we became a stronger family after the kidnapping. And I became a stronger man after the kidnapping.
So what do you need now?
I don't know, it's coming. Whatever. I tell you, I really, it's so weird. I really abandon myself to what happens.
Do you really?
Yeah, I don't.
Do you say, is it fate though, or is it something else?
No, I think you gotta work a lot for what you think is right. But when things come, you gotta analyze and say, why did it happen? Why did it go that way?
But don't you think some things are just inexplicable?
I think that it's our task, and it has been the task of man, to try and figure out why it happened, right, how it happened. I'm not saying that you find the wisdom of it happening, but to find what should not be repeated from it happening, for example. And that's a perfectly objective lesson that we seemingly don't learn at all. Because, the fact that we have constant cultural, physical, human holocausts happening year after year, decade after decade, shows that we have very little desire to really learn from any of that.
Okay, but let me just understand this. If for some reason something terrible would happen to someone you love very much.
Yes. I would think about it. I would emotionally...
Would you rationalize it, that somehow it was...
No, emotionally I would not shy from it. In other words, I would not,
You open yourself to it.
I would so. I think that if you don't live it, if you don't live that, then that pain is going to be repeated later at a grander scale. I really believe it. I mean, it's a strange belief, but I am convinced of it. Mm-hmm. And with my father's kidnapping, we really simply tried to become better. I mean, some families are destroyed by kidnapping. Right. We saw it. Some other families that...
In Mexico.
In Mexico. Some families completely get torn by it. The sons don't want to pay the ransom, or they want to find a way to find financing that is secure. And we completely just took it as our life task to rescue him no matter what.
So what happened in your case?
He came back. We had to pay twice. We paid once, and then they told us, now you have to double the money out of the blue. And we paid the second time, and he came back, and the night he came back is one of the most beautiful moments. Is one moment when he came back, and he really was my father like I've never seen him since or before. He was completely open. I got a glimpse of him because he's a very strong guy, but he's a very closed guy. And I got a glimpse of him that I would never forget.
So what do you think, love or pain has the most impact on us?
I think both. I mean, I really think the fact that we live in a society that tells you all the time that pain is bad, that you should shy away from it, that comfort is great. It's so horrifying for me, because I think that you don't shy away from comfort or from pain. Yeah. You should take whatever comes your way. And I think that's a better approach. When people tell you for your comfort, you drive through, you eat this, everything seems to be drive-through.
In some ways, comfort is soft too.
It is. I mean, this coming from a fat man may sound suspicious, but I actually think that
fat man.
Absolutely. You say, Mr. Exercise, Yeah. But I think, for example, one of the things I love is us knowing our defects really well. I think that knowing our defects makes us better than denying them. When people, all these mental or physical creams and books that tell you this is how you become a better self, lose this, lose that. No, know that you have it. Enjoy that you have it.
Yeah, but I don't go for that. Oh, no.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying listen.
You're not going to convince me that being as heavy as you are is good for you.
No.
And for your kids and for your family.
But you have to recognize it in order to fix it.
Well, are you going to fix it?
I did in the past. Last time I was here, I was nearly an Adonis.
You were.
I was four sizes smaller.
You were.
But
so what happened?
New Zealand has a thing called the pavlova, which is a meringue.
We're going to blame this.
It has a
pavlova.
It's a meringue with cream on top.
Oh God! And so that does it, huh?
Oh my Lord!
A bit about The Hobbit. Now, how is that coming? And
it's great.
How many years? How many months into it?
We are about 8 months solid into it. We've been at it for a year, and we have 3 more years to go. And we're going to shoot starting spring of 2010. We're going to shoot for approximately over a year. And then we're going to release the first movie 2011, second movie 2012.
And so would you spend all of your time between now and 2012 on this film?
As a director, absolutely.
And what else will you do with your time?
That's what I do. I write. That's
so
what I find it a release. Yeah. I really enjoy that my mornings, I've always disciplined myself to use my mornings for writing. And I love waking up early and type and type and type.
Where are you counterintuitive? Where is something that we would be, for example, this is what I was thinking about. Mm-hmm. I call you up and I say, I have this fantastic screenplay.
Yes.
Promise me it's good. And it's a love story. And it's 2 people. and it's set somewhere, but there's no vampires. There are no monsters.
Nothing pops out of anyone's
Nothing pops
head.
out of anybody. There's no snake out of their mouth.
Yes. Oh, my Lord.
Are you going to immediately say no?
No,
Let's assume it was somebody that knew how to write.
Let's say that you
and
give me
they had
that
a great
guarantee.
story. Let's say it was.
I'll read it. Like, let me tell you.
But it's totally against type. You've never made anything like
but
this.
I'll tell you one thing. For example, I would love to have done or do Carson McCullers' The Heart is a Lonely Hunter.
Absolutely.
I would love to do that book as a movie. I love the old movie with Alan Arkin and Sandra Locke, but I think the book is so much more full of possibilities. That type of story I would love to do.
So what are you doing to do it?
You
announce you don't want to do it. That's good.
No, I'm not going to tackle it next, but I really I find that I'll get to it when it feels natural. I am, for example, attracted to crime literature.
No kidding.
Very much.
Chuck Hogan writes crime literature.
And great ones. Have you read Prince of Thieves?
Yeah, exactly.
I love that.
So how did I'll go off on this tangent for a second.
Mm-hmm.
How did you end up with him writing The Strain?
Exactly. I really loved the fact that Chuck was a really immersive writer. I read his novels. I thought he was incredibly strong on factual stuff. And I sent him what I had. And I said, would you like to partner, like literally, co-write this with me? And he read what I had, and he loved it. And we met in New York, and we talked for about 4 hours.
Yeah.
And then we started working through email, which I do often. And I've written 17 screenplays or co-written, and every time is, we send back and forth documents.
On email?
Yeah, on email. And I would write chapters, he would write chapters, we would send them to each other, and we would correct each other, edit each other.
Now, is this better, though, than having one vision and one person's imagination?
I enjoy it because as long as, look, listen, it's really horrible to say, but as long as I'm the director, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's like it's like really democratic until it comes to the final moment.
Yes.
Then it's a dictatorship.
So as long as you know the ultimate decision is yours, you're happy.
Yeah, I am. But I really, I am a benign dictator. I do listen, And,
you listen, but in the end...
Yeah, but for example, Chuck came up with one of the great characters in the novel, which is a rat catcher in New York City.
So
that becomes one of the main protagonists that realizes what's going on, and it's such a bizarre character. He came up with
a rat catcher,
an exterminator, and he realizes what's going on. And I fell in love with him. I had nothing to do with his creation. He came up with it,
right,
and so on and so forth. And we argued. I actually argued with him a lot of times of him putting back stuff. Because
you would try to get him to put it back.
Yeah, there was stuff he took out on one pass, and I said, we need that.
We need that.
Either from me or from him. I would argue. I really enjoy the hell out of writing this
Okay,
book.
but I mean, you've written these screenplays, as you talked about. But is writing as satisfying as directing?
I tell you this is a different feel.
Of course,
but I love it. I am now with what I'm doing in my mornings. I'm writing short stories or little fleshing out in a literary form stuff.
Yeah.
Because look, out of those 17 screenplays or 16 screenplays, whatever it is, I have only made 7 movies. Meaning that 9 movies have been written, and they're really beautiful documents, but nobody's going to read them. Nobody goes, I found an unproduced screenplay. Who is the highest bidder? Nothing. It doesn't happen.
It's not going to happen.
Nobody finds the great movie that Orson Welles never did. I mean, they find it, but you don't find about it. You don't.
Okay, explain that to me. I need to understand that. So let's assume that Orson Welles had been working on something, and I'm sure he was.
Yes.
Exactly. No one will ever be able to make that.
They do it, but it's not anymore an Orson Welles movie. I mean, George Hickenlooper, I think, shot one of the screenplays Welles had unproduced. Right. But what I'm trying to say is, as a literary form, they're going to always stay halfway there. Yeah. And I really find writing this way, I find that they have a life of their own, and they are complete in one way. I mean, I love the fact that we have no rating, no budget construction, no constrictions. I can introspect with the characters. Screenplays are always written in present tense.
Right.
You're saying George walks to the window, and you can, if you say something strange like, there is an aura of menace in the room, That's not a screenplay. You have to say the room is dimly lit. There is a low humming sound. That, you have to make it plausible to objectivize those things, not adjectivize those things. And the liberating thing about this is I can tell you, I can adjectivize and describe and use metaphor, and I'm free to do stuff that I find incredibly liberating. I am enjoying it.
Now, is this going to be any kind of, I mean, what will this lead to, this train?
Well, when I plotted that, I plotted 3 books. I plotted the idea of...
You're an entrepreneur is what you are.
No, because I really said, let's get vampires out of the system once and for all. Like I've been putting little bits here and little bits there. Let's put it all out. And I'm ambitious at that. I want us to reinvent an oblique mythology that allows you to see the origin of vampires as spiritual and physical creatures in a way that hasn't been done before. This book, aside from the morbid detail and attention to anatomy and biology that I think is unique in it, also has, for example, a unique and really harrowing detail, attention to detail on each of the drainings of the victims. I really want to put you on the place, because vampire fiction most of the times deal with it like a form of copulation. They say a rush comes over her body.
Erotic,
it's very erotic, and this is as erotic as a leech draining a Capri Sun little. It's really and for you to feel that you're being essentially drained of life is not a pleasant experience. And I describe them in a way, and Chuck and I describe it in a way that is sensual but not sexual. I want to put you there. I want you to know what it feels to have the thumping chest of the vampire against you as it feels excited about draining you, but at the same time you're dying, and the fingers corkscrewing the hair and pulling tight. I mean, it's really incredibly perverse, the book. Vampires in this book are as romantic as rectal cancer. They're absolutely brutal creatures.
Is there a definitive documentary or book about vampires?
I think there are several. My favorites are, as I said, in the non-literary form, in the factual vampire books. There is one book that was published in the 1700s that is a treatise about spirits, demons, and vampires by a very dodgy priest called Dom Agustin Calmet. Another dodgy priest, really dodgy, a guy called Montague Summers, wrote several treatises of the vampire in Europe, Vampire, His Kith and Kin, then Natural History of Vampirism by Edwards, Passport to the Supernatural by Bernard Herwood. All these are really great books to read.
All right, listen to this. Dedicated to Lorenza.
My wife.
Mariana.
My daughter.
Marisa.
My other daughter.
and to all the monsters in my nursery.
Yes.
May you never leave me alone.
That's exactly.
You want them never to leave you alone.
I want my wife, my daughters, and all the creatures.
You have your daughters and your wife.
And I need my monsters.
And your monsters.
Absolutely.
You're going to be okay.
I would be very lonely.
Oh, here's a great beginning for a novel. Let's try this out. Once Upon a Time.
Hey, I think it has possibilities.
I do too.
I'm gonna register that.
Just as one clip, the aforementioned great show that you and I did together with Alejandro and others. Here it is. Roll tape.
One morning at 6 a.m. in the morning, strangely, one guy called me and said, your film is a masterpiece, but you need to take out the second story of it, everything out. And I said, are you crazy? So I admire you, but so during the next 10 days, I don't know why, so early he called me, just like going on about what to take out. I say, if you are so brave, you should come here. And I have been in my house editing by myself 7 months, and I was getting crazy. And the film was 2 hours, 45 minutes, and I need to take down. So one day
he shows up.
Yeah, he knocks the door. I go up, and there's this guy with the eyes like a kid, like that. I say, "Hi, I'm Guillermo el Toro." So he went directly to the refrigerator. He ate like tons of food. My wife was like completely panicked, and I enjoyed the next 3 days. The next 3 days, like my happiest day in my life, fighting every day. And he helped me really at the end to shape the film.
That's a true story.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, but the confidence and the arrogance to say, you got to take this out.
Alfonso called me. Yeah. Alfonso called me and said, look, there's this guy that is brilliant, but he's so stubborn that we think the only guy that is as stubborn as him is you. And essentially it was King Kong sent against Godzilla. Alfonso set it up. Yes. And he was, he was sending me to do the deed. I was his mercenary.
Agent, yes.
Yeah. And I went there. And, we disagree. Actually, what is great is he says we took out 3 minutes. He started by saying 13 minutes. Yes. They were 20. He said 13 in the first interviews. Second interview, I heard him, he said 7. Last interview, I heard him, he said 3. Right? Now, the great thing is when I moved all my stuff out of the house into my man cave, I found a great artifact. Yeah. I found the original tape of Amores Perros when I saw it first, and it's 20 minutes. Alejandro is 20 minutes. Yeah,
you have the tape.
I have the tape.
All right. The book is called The Strain. Guillermo del Toro and Chuck Hogan, who's written a number of books, which I'll give you the titles that you may recognize: The Killing Moon, Prince of Thieves, The Blood Artist, and The Standoff. Thank you and much success.
A pleasure and a diet in the future.
I'll come check on you in New Zealand.
Please do. And destroy the pavlovas.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time. Funding for Charlie Rose has been provided by the following.
60% of all waste can be recycled. Beverage cans and bottles are among the most recycled in the world. And we're also working toward more efficient beverage containers, one drop at a time.
Additional funding for Charlie Rose was also provided by these funders.
And by Bloomberg, a provider of multimedia news and information services worldwide.
We are PBS.
This concludes our broadcast day. WHUT-TV operates on a frequency of 578 to 584 megahertz with an effective radiated power of 5 megawatts, as authorized by the Federal Communications Commission. WHUT is a public television station licensed to the Howard University Board of Trustees, serving the Washington, D.C. metropolitan community at large. Thank you for watching WHUT, Howard University Television.